attended a real in-person SANS event, we have lots of SANS at night talks. And what we're doing is right now there's some virtual events going on. So this event is similar to a SANS at night, but we virtualized it so it is SANS at Mike. All right, so our speakers for today, first of all, we'll start off. Randy, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. I'm Randy Marchani. I'm the CISO and director of the IT Security Lab at Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia. And I'm also a senior SANS instructor. I've been with SANS since 1992, and I've been in the security field 1 year older than that. And so it's been fun, a fun ride, so to speak, and I'm glad to be here with you tonight.
So what Randy just told you is he's old, really, really old. So folks, if you've ever been to a SANS at night talk, at a SANS event, they're very fun, they're very informal. This is going to be the same thing. Let's keep this fun, let's keep this informal. So the slides will be available after this, the recording will be available after this, and folks, you'll see that we have a questions place. Feel free to ask questions while Randy and I are talking. However, if you prefer also, you can go ahead and email me a question, and I'm putting my email address in the chat channel. So my email address will be, let's see here, I'm looking for, oh, looks like I can't post to everyone. All right, so Carol, if you're there, if you can post my email address to everyone, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, we'll do. I'll send out the eval link, and then I'll send your email in there.
All right, fantastic. And that will come out afterwards. Oh, by the way, Carol just pasted this really long, ugly looking link. You can trust us, really. Now, that's the link to the eval survey for this webcast. So when we're done here, if you could just let Randy and I know what we can do better to improve these, we would love to hear from you. All right, folks, it's late at night. Time is limited, so let's keep this fun, informal, and short. So go ahead, Randy, if we could, to the next slide. Randy's driving today, folks, so, you know, may take a little while. But there we go. All right. So whenever we talk about a solution, first I like to start with the problem. So if we can, next one there. All right. Nothing new here. We all know this. We have a massive, unprecedented push to have people work from home. This is something we're almost all having to deal with. For some organizations, not a big deal. We've been doing that for a while. But for many organizations, this is radically new. And for many people, this is radically new. So the environment has changed, the technology has changed, everything that was normal has changed. In addition to all this chaos is, hey, we're all having to deal with other challenges at home. For those of you that have kids, they're e-learning at home. For those of you that have spouses at work, they are working at home. So quite often you're trying to manage work from home, all these new technologies, while balance this radically new lifestyle of kids and other people working from home. So massive, massive chaos and change. And basically we have anxiety and also urgency. What does this all mean? Next slide. It's the perfect time for the bad guys to strike. Think about it. People are using technology they've never used before, in environments they've never worked in before, or there's this tremendous sense of urgency, fear, and crisis. Just think, just about every social engineering attack is designed on taking advantage of situations like this. Senses of urgency, fear, and crisis. So we've got all this chaos, we've got all this change. Perfect time for the bad guys to strike. So what happens? We, the security community, we scramble and we're like, we've got to go out and secure our workforce. The problem is, and we see this so often, is we, the security geeks, go out and we end up overwhelming and confusing our workforce, who are already overwhelmed and confused. So what we're going to be doing today is Randy and I is focusing on how to really secure your organization as simple as possible. And this is the challenge right here, folks. This is the challenge, because what happens is we, the security community, we feel like we know the answers. We feel like we are the guardians of the digital world, And this is how we perceive ourselves when we want to go secure our workforce. In the reality, the rest of the world really perceives this instead. Yes, nerds. So we have to be careful when we're trying to help our workforce, and we have to try to help our people. We think we're doing the right thing, but because of the DNA and how we're built, this is how we come off. So, by the way, if you know the name of this movie, two things. One, you are truly a nerd. Two, the sad thing is you're actually a really old nerd. So, Randy, you've got to know what movie this is from.
Oh, of course I do, man. And the first part of the title is Revenge.
Revenge of the Nerds. And folks, by the way, if you haven't seen this, it's a true 80s classic. Yep, so Randy, you and I are both old as hell. So one of the things that Randy and I want to emphasize is when we go out and secure folks, do not think of them as the weakest link. Quite often the reason they are struggling is because what we're pushing out is overwhelming and confusing. So people are not the weakest link. It's because of all this chaos. They are the primary attack vector. And we are going to help you help them. All right, Randy, let's go ahead. What do you say you and I talk a bit about the solution? All right, like I said, folks, we're going to keep this fast and informal. In a lot of ways, what's going to happen here is I'm going to give you a high-level overview of how to approach this. And then Randy's going to give you the case study of how he's actually done it. So we're going to give you the theory, and we're going to give you the real-world operations on the solution. So if you could be so kind, let's go up, cue up the next page. So what Randy and I are going to do is first just give you the strategic way to really engage folks. And what we're doing is we're touching into a whole world of behavioral economics and human psychology and change management and cultural change and organizational behavior, things like that. There is a huge world of research and study out there, and these books represent just scratching the surface. But what I'm about to show you is based on all of this research. By the way, I get this asked every single time I show this slide. Lance, these books are cool. Where do I start? The Switch book. The one Randy just circled right there. When you want to get really involved in how to change human behavior, how to engage people, that's probably the first book I recommend out of all of those. All right, so what do we do with all this fantastic scientific research? Randy, next slide, please. What this research really tells us, and there's all sorts of fascinating things. We don't have time to go into detail, but the key thing to apply from this world of science to what Randy and I are about to teach you is this. There's this concept of cognitive overload, choice overload, and things like that. Long story short, one of the biggest areas we mess up in the cybersecurity world is we overwhelm people trying to make them super secure. So we overwhelm them with information. We give them a huge number of behaviors they should follow, all of these different options because we want them to be secure. So we dump everything on them. In reality, the tough thing we need to do is instead take a step back, and instead of teaching them everything, teach them as little as possible. Make security as simple as possible. The fewer behaviors you teach, the more likely they're going to actually do them. Quite often, and I've been doing this for over 10 years now, quite often the biggest challenge when trying to create a secure culture, when trying to secure people, it's not deciding what to teach. It's deciding what not to teach. So Randy and I are going to show you how you can focus on the fewest, simplest behaviors possible to enable people to easily work from home securely. Keep in mind, like I said, they're already overwhelmed with all this new technology. Their kids are e-learning from home and having to track that. Their spouses are learning from home. We're, ordering food. Everything's changed. So the key thing is we have to make secure video conferencing as simple as possible. How do we do that? Randy, what do you have for us?
Well, one of the biggest things is as we're trying to say here, is to keep it as simple as possible. I came from a sysadmin background. I was a sysadmin for 25 years, and you know, the joke amongst us was, if somebody came up and said, how do I get from point A to point B? I would say, well, are you going to walk? Are you going to drive? Are you going to drive a car? Are you going to ride a bicycle? Are you going to do a motorcycle? And they're like, enough. I just need to get from point A to point B. And we're down in the weeds. So I know a lot of you have heard of all the issues that Xoom has had recently. And you know, in case you haven't figured this out, all of the video conferencing software things have similar issues. They've just never been scrutinized like all the other standard security programs and general use programs on the internet. And in fairness to Xoom, they've done a tremendous job in getting the fixes out as quickly as possible. But it comes down to just a couple of simple things. Number one, whatever client you're using, whether it's GoToMeeting, Xoom, Signal, Slack, any of these things, whichever one you use, make sure you have the latest version of that client software. Why? Because any problems that were in older versions are most likely fixed in the newer versions. So you want to make sure you got the latest version of whatever the client software is you use. And it's kind of easy sometimes, because with a lot of these tools, or services rather, the moment you fire up a client, it'll say, hey, we got a new update. Do you want to install it? You should always say yes. You know, just yes, you want to install the latest update. The other thing that you want to make sure of, especially in the video conferencing thing, like now, is you want to make sure that you know, you've got your audio set up, your microphones are set up. You want to make sure that you've got a reasonably quiet part of the house wherever you are. You know, one of the jokes, of course, with any video conference meeting nowadays is somebody's got to instantly put their microphone on mute because their dogs are barking because someone showed up at the door. Same thing with video. You want to make sure that whatever's behind you, you know, you don't have racks of old, you know, laundry or drying laundry or anything like that. You know, you've seen all the YouTube videos where the dad comes out and he starts doing an exercise routine in his underwear while the kid's trying to do an e-learning thing or something like that. As a presenter and as an attendee, make sure you know what's behind you as well as what's in front of you. And so these are some of the audio video settings and the background. The new thing now is people get these you know, stylized backgrounds that you can put there. Those are great, you know, and if your computer can handle it, go for it. You want to be careful who you invite to your meeting. This is kind of like, you know, throwing a party and then making sure that you know everybody who's coming to the party. You know, there's an old movie, Wedding Crashers, I think, where, you know, the two main characters would crash all these wedding receptions. And, you know, who are you? Oh, I'm a friend of the bride. Or who are you? I'm a friend of the groom. So make sure that you know who you're inviting, and that only the people that you want to be in on a session is good. Something like this, where we're in the webcast, not a problem. We got hundreds of people that are listening to the presentation. But if Lance and I are having a business meeting where we're talking about stuff, you know, that pertains to whatever it is we're working on, we want to make sure that only the two of us are you know, in that meeting. And the same thing with screenshots. You know, make sure that you know what's in the background and all of this type of stuff. That's from the attendee side. That's from your side. You're listening to somebody, you know, or in a meeting or in a presentation like this. For the organizers of the meeting, you certainly want to have the updated software for the host side of the transaction, right? You want to make sure that you know passwords. One of my senior security architect, who's the head of the red team here in my office, I like to brag on him. He's one of the big password experts, and he regularly competes in the Black Hat Crack Me challenges. But he does this wonderful presentation on passwords. And before you know, before NIST got rid of the password complexity rules, for instance, he would come out and say most people pick a password in this form. You got a number, you have a word, you have a special character. And because, you know, you were usually somewhere between 8 and 10 characters, usually your word was 6 characters long, you picked a 2 or 4 digit number, your special characters were almost always an exclamation point or a period or a $ sign or a number sign. And if it was an exclamation or period, 90% of the time that would show up at the end of your password because, you know, it's punctuation. And if it was a dollar sign or number sign, a pound sign, you would usually put that at the beginning of that. And your number might be something like a year, the year you graduated from high school or college, or when your kids were born, or when you were married or got divorced, depending on how you look on these things. But the key thing was the word. And he said the most common pattern that everybody follows in their password is what we call the Batman pattern. So if you guys that are listening to this broadcast right now, if you write down the word Batman, B-A-T-M-A-N, and you look at it and you see there's a consonant vowel pattern. Consonant, vowel, consonant, consonant, vowel, consonant. So you got words like Batman, Tigger, soccer. You got all these other different types of words. Jordan. You got all these different types of words that people pick for their word part of their password. So again, be real careful what the passwords are. These, you know, and I just talked a little bit about some of the phonological, forms of words in the English language. You can do all sorts of things with that. You want to look at your attendee list. You want to make sure that the people you invited are the people that are actually connected to it. And if you see something that somebody's name or somebody's got a screwy name on there, kick them off and see if they come back on again. And you want to lock the conference to not let other people get in once your conference is set up. Now, this is good practice for a business meeting. Once you know that, there's 7 people in my team, and when all 7 of us are on the Zoom session, we use Zoom here at Virginia Tech, when all 7 are on there, I lock the presentation. There's no reason for anybody else to connect to it. And if anybody does disrupt, your video conference, kick them off right away. No mercy. Done. And just like we were talking about attendees, you want to make sure that your audio, video settings, your screenshots, your screen sharing, your background, all of those 3 things are all set up correctly. If you're doing this for a class or something like that, you want to let people know at the very beginning that this is going to be recorded. And then, again, you might want to disable some of your screenshots. So these are general tips for the attendees and for the organizers. And so, especially if you're in a work environment, you're doing stuff from home, then let me suggest this as a starting point. You've got policies and you've got standards at your place of employment, wherever you work. And in most cases, at Virginia Tech, we aligned our security policies and standards to pretty much be protect your sensitive data, things like social security numbers, credit card numbers, driver's license numbers, passport numbers, bank, and those type of things. That's what we would call protecting your sensitive data. There are lots. Every state in the union now has some sort of data breach notification law, where an organization that causes a data breach has to do some reporting, maybe to law enforcement, maybe to the state government, and certainly to the people affected. So you want to align your policies and standards with this in mind, because you're going to be discussing business confidential data. You're going to maybe discussing stuff about socials or credit card numbers. You want to make sure that you're doing this all within the parameters of your local policies and standards. And this part isn't any different than what you'd be doing at work. If you're at your office computer and chatting with somebody inside your company, you would still be very careful about this, how you discuss sensitive data on there. Where it gets a little wonky now is on the endpoint side of the house. Some companies will let you take a work-owned computer home, but in some cases, especially with those of you that are in a monolithic Active Directory, there needs to be some adjustment to let those machines function inside your Active Directory from outside the network border. And so, you've got little things like that. Maybe you don't get a work computer. Maybe you have to use your home computer. When I teach SANS classes and we talk about endpoint security, I always used to make a little joke. I said, I would bet you a glass of your favorite beverage that the security of your home computer was much less than the security of your work computer, especially if you have kids or teenagers. Ooh, shiny object, must click on it to download something, that type of stuff. You want to make sure that your default settings for whatever the video conference tool you use, GoToMeeting has default settings, Zoom has default settings, Teams has default settings, WebEx has default settings. you want to make sure that you align and set those default values to match whatever the requirements are for protecting sensitive data at your organization. And what's your business? For us, we're a university. In 10 days, we converted, I think it's 4,500 classes to a 100% online. We've had, since the 23rd of March, probably 55,000 Zoom sessions and 15 or 16 million Zoom minutes of online classes. But that's a different environment. We record stuff. It's a two-way street. We want students to interact. You have assignments that you give out and things like that. You record. That's a different setting from a standard business topic where maybe you're talking about budgets or sales plans or anything like that. And that's completely different from what's been happening now. In Virginia, we've been in a lockdown mode, for about 3 or 4 weeks now. And my staff, I haven't seen my staff in person in probably a month, but one day a week, right after work, 5:30, something like that, we have a video conference happy hour. So we all sit here with our little beers and our favorite drinks, and we chat about anything. And I was surprised at how much fun that was. I thought, oh, you got a bunch of people that are maybe, basically introverts, and the old joke of how can you tell, if a geek is an extrovert because he looks at your shoes when he's talking to you, that type of stuff. Well, you got this video happy hour thing, but each one of these 3 major categories, they're completely different requirements, and so make sure you know which ones you're set up for. So here's an example at Virginia Tech. So we have a set of policies and standards, and the URLs for this, they're located, when you download the presentation, look in the notes section of these slides, and you'll see the URLs that'll point you to these screens. So here, what I'm just showing you is some of the university IT policies and standards. There are a few more than what you see here on the screen, but the idea is, we see here in security and data protection, we've got a number of policies, and we have standards that sort of give you the requirements needed to comply with those policies. So your organization has a list very similar to this, okay? Then here I pulled out a specific one. This is a lot of companies have been in the process of trying to write what I'll call mobile device policies and standards. At Virginia Tech, we said, we don't know what type of technology is. Now, BYOD in our world, in the educational world, higher ed world, it's nothing new for us. In fact, we've been in a BYOD environment at Virginia Tech since 1984. 84 was when we first started requiring students to purchase computers to connect to our campus. So in that way, my security model in that BYOD world is kind of like an ISP. I don't tell people that I can't tell people what type of software they can install on their own personally owned devices. I can say you have to have these software components in order to connect to our network. But if you got, a mother of a gaming system and all you're doing is Grand Theft Auto or flight simulators or whatever, it's good for you. I can't tell you that you can't have that on your computers. So we took this approach of saying, we just called it a technology resource. We didn't specify. We didn't say laptop or desktop. I mean, like I said, in 1984 it was a desktop computer. Now we have laptops, we have mobile, we have Internet of Things, we got all sorts of things. We call them a technology resource. And the bullet points here show what those are. If it's owned or managed by a university, connected to our network, or stores our data, or is connected to some other service. But the bottom paragraph of this display that you see right here, this is where we say, yeah, you can bring your own device, personally owned device, not owned by the university. You can bring it and connect it to our network. But the moment you do that, you play by our rules. This is nothing new. Your ISP does this. When you have your own home computer at home, you connect to the internet through an ISP, you're playing by their rules. So having this type of a policy is the next step. That's your high level thing. If your employees get upset that you're making them do something, you point them to a policy like this. Well, the next thing after that is, again, remember I said that we go on our risk classifications for our data. So what's that? Well, we simplified it. We got this, we borrowed this approach from Stanford University. We used to have 4 or 5 data risk classifications. Those of you that are in the government, you know how many that is. We collapsed it to 3. And the one I'm going to focus on here is the high risk one down at the bottom. So data and systems are classified as high risk if the protection of the data is required by law and self-regulation, and Virginia Tech is required to self-report to the government and or provide notice to individual if the data is inappropriately accessed. And then you have the usual loss of confidentiality. But you notice, a system is a high-risk system if it stores or processes high-risk data. A system, a technology resource is a low-risk technology resource if it processes low-risk data. So we tied it to the data, okay? So this is our data classification standard. And then here we have, for instance, what I'm showing you here is a minimum security standard for endpoints. And an endpoint we define to be a laptop, desktop, or any other type of mobile device. The minimums, you can see on the right-hand side, the low, medium, and high, the yellow, orange, and maroon. Again, the minimum standard for anything is denoted there in yellow. And you can go down here and you can see what's going on. If you have high-risk data, then you have to go down and obviously comply with whatever the regulations are that deal with the data on there. But you also have to do this for centralized logging. So here we go from standard, from policy to standard to checklist, okay? And so we have this here. This is just for endpoints, but we have one for servers and we have one for applications as well. And the application one is probably the one that you can use for to make sure that your video conferencing software settings comply with your particular standards for high-risk applications, okay? So with that, I want to, before we jump here, I'm going to bounce out of this presentation because I want to show you a couple of websites. And so first thing is, this is one from Xoom. And don't worry, I'm not going to expect you to read it. At the end of the presentation, you'll see the links for this particular page here. And then here we have for Slack, those of you that are using Slack, we have, again, sorry, I was at the Zoom thing here. And then again, another Xoom things. Xoom came out with a lot of information on how to do best practices. At Virginia Tech, and again, the URL for this page is in the notes section of the slide. Virginia Tech, this is a best practices for security. First off, changing the settings, and here's how you would do that. You know, do the meetings and set the tabs. Here are some security settings that, if you looked at the Xoom best practices, they pretty much match one for one. How to secure a Xoom client, and here are some of the things that you want to make sure are turned on. And then we use Canvas as a course management system. There are things like that. What do you do if you're going to respond to somebody who's interrupting? And you can lock the annotations to keep them from doing anything there. You can disable it. You can remove disruptive participants and things like that, okay? And so you have that type of you know, capabilities there, okay? As another example, so over here in Xoom, you have settings, and you can set these are all the settings that are just with Xoom alone. And Xoom Consumer pretty much had a lot of these disabled because they wanted to make it easy for end users to use. But these are some of the things that you can do with. You can set, you can force people to log into Xoom with a Xoom account. You can require passwords. You can tell it to generate a random password, and rather than use one that you keep using over and over. You want to mute the participants when they come in. You know, and then there's an interesting one I wanted to show you, and I'm scrolling down here. Bear with me, because Xoom, one of the things that they're coming out with is a security update. I think it's next week or in the next 2 weeks. But here you can say, hey, I want any of my data to only go through certain regions of the world. And after April 25th, China will be deselected by default. If you want to opt into China data centers, in other words, let your Xoom data go through a Xoom data center that's located in China. And by the way, it's actually managed and owned by an Australian company, but you can select that as well. So they've made all sorts of stuff. People talk about recordings. A lot of times, none of the GoToMeeting, Zoom, WebEx, none of these guys put your recordings, make them available to anyone outside of the Zoom session. Where it failed, you remember when we talked about attendees and knowing what to do? Where a lot of this failed was somebody put out on a Twitter feed or a Facebook page, hey, I put the recording of this session with Lance and them, and here's the link to it. And now that's a public forum. And so, you can have a data leakage there, especially if you were recording a meeting where you're discussing future sales plans or things like that. So this is just an example of the number of settings that are there for you as a host organizer and as an attendee. And so, part of this is learning how to do the stuff and do the training. Okay. So hopefully you got kind of a 50,000 foot version of some of the resources that are out there to help you do this. For us, Zoom and video conferencing really wasn't a big deal I'd say for about a quarter of the faculty, because a lot of us were teaching online classes to begin with. A number of universities, Liberty University for one, they have over 100,000 students in their online program. Georgia Tech has probably the same number of online students in their graduate and undergraduate things. So, a lot of these things you need to consider and understand that they're learning. Some of these guys went from maybe 2 million users to 200 million users in the last 2 months. And any of you that have done any type of system administration, you know that those guys are running backwards with carts full of servers and throwing them in a rack and bringing those servers up to handle the extra capacity. So with that, I hope you got a little bit of stuff from me. I'll hand it back to Lance.
All right, Randy, thanks so much. And what I'm going to do, folks, is I know there's a lot of information dumped on you. So what I'm going to do is take a step back and just walk you through how to really simply take what we've given you and share it with your workforce. Because what we're trying to do is make your job simpler. So a couple of things to consider, and this is not just for video conferencing, but if you're expecting your people to use video conferencing software and they're at home, what you may want to do is host an internal website that explains what's expected of people, all these different tips, but have links to that software. So instead of them going out and finding Zoom on their own, or going out and finding Slack, Discord, Microsoft Teams, or whatever, they could stumble across something malicious out there. The bad guys are going to try to take care of this. So first of all, if you're looking for people to install software, somehow push it out, have trusted links. Also, quite often, if the software is licensed by your organization, so instead of people downloading a version that's free and they run it themselves, if it's licensed by your organization, quite often, and Randy alluded to this, is there's default settings you can set across all the systems for the applications. And remember, the fewer choices people have to make, the more we do for them, and security is set by default, the easier we make their lives. So, Randy, if we could, the next slide. A couple of things to help you folks out here. So, first of all, and I'm going to show you a link here in just a moment. What Randy and I and the folks at SANS have done is we've taken the tips. So we have 5 basic tips that attendees should do when they are attending a conference, and 10 basic tips that conference organizers should do to secure their video conferencing. And we've made these tips vendor neutral. And like Randy just showed you, there's ways to implement them technically for each specific one. But we're giving them to you vendor neutral, and we're giving you these resources for free where you can modify and edit them. So this is an example of just a very simple tips you can give to attendees. You can modify this if you want, and in it you see Randy, I, and the folks at SANS have explained each of those 5 things. So this is an example of trying to make something that could be complex very, very simple. And if you want to provide additional information on how to do each one of these specific to whatever vendor you're using, by all means. So very simple 5 tips for attendees. And then Randy, if you could, in the next page, we put another very simple document together. And once again, I'm going to show you the link, and I'm going to show you, you can download them, you can modify them, edit them, reuse them any way you want. We've done the 10 simple tips for organizers. And like I said, Randy's already gone through the 5 tips for attendees and 10 tips for organizers. The whole idea being, what are the key, most fundamental steps people can take to really video conference securely? I'm sure there's more tips. We work very hard. Randy and I worked with several other SANS instructors to come up with no more than these. So we try to simplify it as much as possible. So Randy, if you could please, the next slide. Now, when you're putting these materials together, geeks, I know you and I think we have great editing skills, but for a lot of us, we don't. When you're going to create a tip sheet, when you're going to communicate out to your workforce, do us all a favor, take a step back and partner with marketing. Take communications out to lunch, maybe partner with a graphic designer. We tend to cram a lot of text into a small amount of space. Give whatever you want to put out to these folks, and they're going to simplify it. They're going to make it clean, professional, and easy for people to consume. So you create the tips. You create what people need to know, but partner with somebody to help package it up so it's really easy for people to consume. Next slide. So now what we need to do is one final thing. When we push this information out to your workforce, and we're using video conferencing as an example, but it works for anything, is they're going to have a lot of questions. So have some trusted channel where they can ask them. Yeah, we've got email, but wouldn't it be great if you hosted something like a trusted Slack channel where people could ask questions in real time and then you could reply in real time? What a great opportunity for the security team to build trust and build a better relationship with your workforce by helping them. Now, the only thing I am going to caution us is, hey, our workforce is going to have a lot of questions. They're going to want to interact with us, the security team. Bad guys are going to want to take advantage of this and interact with the security team or the help desk or the support desk. So whoever on your team is helping interact with your workforce, answering questions, helping secure them, make sure they understand they could be targeted by bad guys pretending to be employees, because maybe the bad guys want to learn what you're using, the setup, and things like that. So how can we make your life easier? Go ahead, next slide. First of all, like we said, Randy and I are going to show you the link in just a moment where you can download a tip sheet for the top 5 things attendees should do, the top 10 things that organizers should do. Then for whatever vendor you're using, you can give specific examples. And we're going to give you links to lots of different vendors there, but each vendor shows you how to implement these tips in very specific models. And now, like Randy just mentioned, Zoom's gotten a lot of publicity, but you know what? All of the video conference vendors are probably in the same state. The one good thing is because Zoom has gotten all this publicity, they are the ones doing the most that I'm seeing to secure the platform. So for example, go to Microsoft Teams, go to GoToMeeting, which we're using right now, go to Zoom and things like that. Of all the sites, Zoom's got the best documentation. Remember, in 2002, we were all slamming Microsoft for having the worst security in the world. They turned around, and now they're the example of how to develop secure operating systems. What ends up happening, Zoom in many ways could be the same thing. So before we make fun of Zoom, go to their website. Out of all the websites I visited, it's, I think, the best from a security perspective. So on the next slide, These are examples or links where you could go to for some of the most popular: Zoom, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams, Slack. But regardless of what vendor you're using, they will have examples, templates, FAQs, blogs on how to take the tips we've given you and convert them into actual how to do it. Okay, let's wrap things up here. So this is just an example from the Zoom website. So for example, we said, hey folks, organizers, make sure you require a password for people to join the conference. There's how you set this up. And a couple other things too. So the websites are fantastic for the details. I love this quote from Bruce. Hey, you know what? If you think technology alone can solve your security problems, then you know what? We don't understand the problem. We don't understand the technology. And what we're just trying to emphasize there is, like we said, there's a lot of change. There's a lot of chaos going on. Our workforce is struggling. Instead of blaming them for being the problem, let's take a step back and figure out how we can make their life a little bit easier. And to do that, Randy and I want to share this with you. See that link in the bottom, Work From Home Kit? It has those templates that you can use. Go ahead, grab them. They're in PowerPoint, folks. You can edit them any way you want. Edit them, reuse them, distribute them. But you know what? At that website, we have all sorts of other materials free for you to use on how to people can secure themselves at home. All sorts of awareness training in 30 languages. A lot of it is traditionally or typically our commercial resources that we're giving away for free, all about work from home. Now, if you have a specific question about Randy and I, what we presented today, there is my email address. But you know what, Randy, you want to take a couple quick questions?
Sure, let's go ahead and do that.
All right, folks, if you have any questions, post them into the chat channel and or question thing. We're only going to do one or two. It's been a long night, so we appreciate you joining us. But if you have any questions, or Carol, if you could help us out, do we have any questions?
Hi, yes, we do have a question ready for the Q&A. What is the prevailing philosophy on instructing employees to take specific steps to secure home networks? Firewalls, Wi-Fi settings, even smart.
Fantastic.
Okay,
so you know, to answer that question, you see that URL there? We literally have a video in over 30 languages that you are welcome to point anybody to that says, hey folks, this is how to create a secure home network. And the challenge you have with how to secure a home network is you can't go into specific technology how to, because you have no idea what Wi-Fi device, what router, if they're going with, you know, mesh networks, you have no idea. So you have to explain it in a very simple term and focus on the key behaviors for people to do that. So we've got all the resources all ready for you. Do that at the URL there in 30 different languages. So just go grab what you need, use what you need, and hopefully that solves your problem right there.
And let me give you just one quick tip. Change your default wireless password for your Wi-Fi routers. Whatever it was that when you unpacked it from the box and you installed it, change it. Because if you don't believe me, go out to Google and type and search for default wireless router passwords. You'll get tons of sites that have all of the default passwords for just about every hardware version of a wireless router out there.
And to Randy's point, that's probably one of the very first things we cover in the video. So absolutely. So hopefully that will help solve your problem. What else do we have? Any other questions?
Yes. Do you have any plans to discuss niche markets? I've been personally researching quite a few solutions, and they all seem to have different approaches to things like HIPAA, despite having similar infrastructures.
So if you're asking into different solutions for video conferencing software, yeah, there's going to be a lot out there. I would keep in mind what's the simplest for your workforce to use, because it can have all these fancy bells, whistles, and security features. But if people are confused by it, they're probably going to make mistakes, and that's where your security incidents are big drivers. I don't know. And Randy, how would you answer that one?
Well, specifically for Zoom, Zoom has a version of it that is HIPAA compliant. Zoom is actually FedRAMP certified. Teams is also as well, I think Microsoft. And but when you talk to those vendors, ask them, do you have a version of your video conferencing software for HIPAA, for PCI? I think the new one now is for CUI, but it's certainly, that's a question you should ask whoever it is you're considering to use.
I mean, I'm beginning to dread that word CUI. That's the new big buzzword for 2020. You know, 2018 it was GDPR. This year it's going to be CUI.
Yeah.
And folks, if you don't know what CUI is, count yourself lucky. All right, tell you what, we'll do one more and call it a night because it's late.
Okay, you mentioned training our remote workforce on the fewest behaviors possible. So what would your top 5 behaviors be to focus on for remote workforce?
All right, so when it comes to just overall general remote workforce, so we had 5 for video conferencing.
Right.
For just working, I'm going to let Randy give his 5. Actually, I'd limit to 3. And what I would do is, and I'm saying there's not just 3 behaviors, there's a lot. But if we don't get these 3 core behaviors down, our workforce is at high risk. So the 3 behaviors are what I call you, passwords, updating. So the whole idea is you are actually quite often the greatest defense because bad guys are going to go after you. And the whole idea is teaching people about social engineering. What is social engineering? What are the biggest indicators so they can protect themselves with phishing emails, scam phone calls, text messages, bogus text messages. You teach them how to identify the indicators of those common social engineering attacks. So A, I call it you, but it's social engineering. B, passwords, good strong passwords, good use of passwords. I recommend password managers that make passwords simple. So we have you, we have passwords, and we have updating. And if you don't have those 3 core things, yeah, you can have antivirus, yeah, you can have firewalls and all that stuff, but if you don't have those 3, you're at high risk. I don't know, Randy, I'm curious, what are your top 3, top 5 for working home?
Those 3 are exactly what I would recommend. Also, I would add one more thing. For those of you that are using a home desktop, you know, your job didn't give you one to use, and you're trying to log into your you know, company resources through your home desktop. I would recommend that you create an account on that home desktop that you use only to talk to your work environment. So, you know, here at home, I've got a home desktop. My wife, she has one user ID. I have another user ID, completely separate, you know, from that. And then my one user ID is the one that I use to, you know, remote back to work. That way, if there's any damage, you sort of limit the damage to the accounts in case one of your kids decides to download something and it gets installed on the machine. Most ransomware will just, you know, install into whatever the account is. And so that would be my recommendation is if you're going to use your home computer, create a separate account on that home computer and use that account to do all your work video conferencing, whatever it is that you do for work.
Sounds good. Yep, last thing you want is Minecraft running while you're doing work.
That's right.
All right, you know what, folks? Tell you what, it's late at night. You've got the recording. You've got my email address. I'm happy to put you in touch with Randy if need be. But Carol, Randy, how about we call it a night? Let people get back to family and friends and carry on.
Sounds good to me. Thanks a lot, guys.
Hey, folks, thank you so much for joining us. Carol, appreciate the help. Folks, catch you in cyberspace.